This is one of my favorite strategies for making money on NFL player props. Okay, it works best early in the week when markets are inefficient. And what you're going to notice is the first two platforms to post NFL player prop odds for the games on Sunday. It's currently Tuesday. So the first sports books or, operators to post odds for the upcoming Sunday are PrizePicks and Underdog Fantasy. And what you're going to notice is some massive discrepancies between the sports books early in the week, right? When the market is kind of trying to figure out where the line should be, there's some massive discrepancies. So the first example is Geno Smith. His passing yards line, if we look on Underdog Fantasy, is over under 248.5, right? If we zoom in, Geno Smith over under 248.5. Now, if we go to PrizePicks, as you can see on the screen, so this is a free way you can browse odds on OddsJam. It's called a screen, and it just kind of allows you to browse odds side by side across the market, and you'll see the only sportsbooks posting player prop odds for Sunday this early in the week are Underdog Fantasy and PrizePicks. So then I'm just looking for massive discrepancies. So obviously for Matthew Stafford, there's nothing really interesting, right? PrizePicks has his line at 255 half passing yards. So does Underdog Fantasy. Nothing interesting. But what you'll notice for Geno Smith is there's 28 yards of discrepancy. Underdog has over under 248.5. PrizePicks 220.5. So if we go to PrizePicks, we can see here, if we go to Geno Smith, 220.5 versus 248.5. So that's a pretty massive difference. So what I try to do is I try to find a few over-unders on PrizePicks and Underdog Fantasy and make an entry where I take all the overs on one sportsbook and all the unders on another sportsbook, and I'm able to essentially work into a middle where, for example, if Geno Smith has exactly 230 passing yards, then my over on PrizePicks is going to win because I'd want to take the over 220.5 on PrizePicks, and my under 248.5 will also win, right? So I'm looking for these big line discrepancies where I can take the over on PrizePicks and the under on Underdog Fantasy. And oftentimes there's these huge gaps where you're able to take advantage of betting the over on one sportsbook, the under on another sportsbook, and have a pretty big middle opportunity, right? The probability that Geno Smith has exactly 230, 240, 235, 245, passing yards, it's not small. 28-yard difference is pretty massive in terms of player passing yards. So this is the first pick I ended up going with. Then you can see there's some other discrepancies. Davis Mills, 7 yards. So 7 yards for Davis Mills obviously isn't as big of a deal as 28 yards for Geno Smith. But regardless, we can see there's another massive, massive discrepancy. This is going to amaze you guys. Right here, Zach Wilson. Underdog has his passing yards line. If we take a look right here. So let's type in Wilson at 200 half. If we go over to PrizePicks, you can see it's at 170 half. So we want to be all over this over. We want to be all over this over. And then we want to be on this under, right, to get into this middle. And then we want to be on this under. So we can look for a few more plays. And what you'll notice is if we look away from passing yards, is the next play we want to be all over is Kenneth Walker rushing yards. Underdog Fantasy, again, I'm just looking for massive discrepancies. Here, Brian Robinson, 54.5 versus 56.5 is where the line is set on PrizePicks versus Underdog. Not that big of a deal. Derrick Henry, 105.5 versus 100.5. Here we have Kenneth Walker, 93.5 versus 76.5. So I want to be all over this play in terms of rushing yards. I want Walker over on PrizePicks. 76.5 is where his line is set. And then I want to take Walker under on Underdog Fantasy, right? So you can see this right here. So then what we can do is we can be like, okay, So we have 3 pretty big line discrepancies. Is there anything else out there? And you'll notice, yeah, there is. The next biggest one I could find, which I'm going to share with you, which hopefully you guys are able to get in on, is right here. DeAndre Hopkins, 79.5 versus 67.5. Again, pretty massive difference. So I'm going to go ahead to player receiving yards. I want to take Hopkins over on PrizePicks. So let's hit it for the max I can. And it's going to say, I think I may have come close to hitting the max on this. So I just bet this twice. It's for $50 both times, right? And then I'll just take these 3. So these are the biggest line discrepancies. You know, DeAndre Hopkins was 67.5 versus what was it here? So if we type in DeAndre Hopkins, 79.5, so 12-yard difference there. You know, the Zach Wilson one was pretty massive. So maybe what we can do is we can take a little bit of, you know, in a 3-pick entry, because 3-pick entries are more advantageous than 4-pick entries on Underdog. Maybe we take this for like $125. Boom. And we have something like this on Underdog. So I'm currently submitting it, and we'll see when it takes it. So we definitely want Kenneth Walker under. We definitely want Zach Wilson under. And you can see I just created a few different iterations of this. Kenneth Walker under, Geno Smith under, Zach Wilson under. And then here we have DeAndre Hopkins under, Zach Wilson under, Kenneth Walker under. So again, there's oftentimes these massive discrepancies where PrizePicks is opening the line way too low, and Underdog Fantasy is opening the line way too high, and we can get Geno Smith under 248.5 passing yards, and then also get him over 220.5, which is a massive middle bet. So I love using the screen early in the week and just like scanning, you know, very briefly between the sports books, looking for these big discrepancies. So hopefully you found this video helpful. You know, what we may want to do as an example is just, depending on who you think is more accurate, you could double down on an entry like this, right? This one seems pretty incredible. DeAndre Hopkins under, Zach Wilson under, Kenneth Walker under, and, you know, let's make some money.